Dawson Rider Wiki.
Hey YouTube, Dawson Rider here. Welcome to my review for the mid-season finale for the second season of Power Rangers Beast Morphers. We got one more episode than usual this year before we hit the hiatus, which was kind of nice. And I thought it was a very strong episode to end off on. Probably one of the best of the season, in my opinion. I do have a couple little nitpicks, but it more so has to do with problems I'm having with the season overall than it does specifically this episode in most cases. But I thought it was a really strong premise because you had the main plot working for you with the Evox Mayor stuff. You were also following up on a character story that was introduced last season with Nate and Zoe, and it all worked together nicely, and there wasn't a need to shoehorn a useless, outdated filler lesson. Like, the lesson of this episode was actually learned by the commander about not following the dogmatic, narrow view of the Jedi about attachments. It was basically like the same thing as the prequel Jedi's, like, dogma. It's like, yeah, with attachments, there's bad stuff that can happen, but there's also good stuff, and it's stupid to seal it off. And so that was kind of nice, because it was actually a lesson more so learned about a character that involved the plot, instead of trying to preach something at us. And so that was nice, and they didn't feel the need to figure in like a third lesson that didn't need to be there about something. And I like that it was following up on something and that it blended together essentially two plot lines, which was the main plot line of this season with the mayor and, like I said, the Nate and Zoe stuff. And it worked together rather nicely. And there's a couple little nitpicks about it. You know, you started off, the main premise with that was that Steele found out that they liked each other and was trying to sort of engineer a date for them, and when they needed to protect the mayor, that presented the perfect opportunity. Now, my only nitpick about this, again, isn't really a nitpick about this episode, but given that was introduced, I think it was like, give or take, a little past midway through last season. I wish they would have followed up on this plot line one other time at least. It really bothers me when PR and Sentai will introduce a storyline and then never mention it for like a really long time until they pick up on it. I think that if they would have seeded it throughout maybe a little bit more, it would have been kind of nice. And again, that's kind of more of a problem with the season overall, but it seemed like it was absolutely not touched on at all between way last season and now, so that would have been kind of nice. But I created a nice premise with Steele, and there's even a nice moment with Ben and Betty when he's getting them ready to have their equipment for the stakeout, and he's like, look, I had them, you whip up these disguise balls or whatever they were called. And that was kind of a funny moment because it was involving Steele's plans for them, but it also reminded me more of the way Ben and Betty were used last season, where it felt like they were more integrated into the cast and actually had a charming moment where they weren't 100% a joke. It was a small moment, and they still had joke moments in this, but I wanted to highlight that because I feel that's been one of the other problems this half season, is that Ben and Betty have felt more Victor and Monty, whereas last season I felt they were more balanced, and they had moments where they weren't 100% incompetent and part of the show, and this was a small taste of that, which added to it. Speaking of them doing the stakeout stuff, we did get a brief spotting of the binoculars form for the weapon, which, is that the first time that's been spotted? They might have used them one time before, but I'm always surprised that they basically didn't want to keep the transforming, like, gadget weapons, because I never felt that was too silly of a thing. Like, no more silly than the weird windmill sword we introduced in this episode, so, I don't know, I just thought that was worth mentioning. I feel like we might have used it one time before, but we rarely see the gadgets. And so, what was interesting about the mayor premise is I liked that basically he needs to get morph-x to keep his form, and I have something to say about that later, but he was able to get his juiced up, but then he needed more, and he basically wasn't able to get any more from his posse, because then the Rangers were like, oh no, you're in danger, you need a bodyguard. And that created a really interesting situation. I did like the way they made use of it. I love the way that the actor used this. Like, he looked so visibly annoyed. It was really funny. He was like, thank you for protecting me. It reminded me, like, his entire attitude towards it was like my attitude whenever they're doing like a moral filler. Like, that was his same attitude. And so it was really interesting, and I liked the way they made use of that, and it 100% made sense. However, I do have a couple little nitpicks about this. I mean, first of all, I still don't quite understand how the whole thing works with the mayor and him and the sharing of the bodies. And it's just kind of weird in the sense that, okay, so he needs morph-x to hold the mayor's form. Then it begs the question, why does he even need the mayor to stay together unless, like, he's, like, creating a life force for him? But if it's gonna cause that many problems, why not just create a robo-mayor for him to control? Because the biggest reason that I think he needs the mayor is because he can take advantage of his connections. But if it's going to cause that many problems, why not just create a RoboCopy and then just stay at home and you don't have to worry about accidentally turning back into the mayor? So I feel like the ins and outs of that is a little bit confusing. Whereas like with Anton Mercer and stuff, it was just more, it just kind of happened randomly, you know, and despite the fact that it was random, it set up more clear rules and reasoning for it. So I'm a little bit still confused by why that happens other than plot convenience. The other thing is, okay, so he's unable to be approached by the villains to get his morph-x because then it's perceived as a threat. But you know what would be really handy? If we had good versions of Blaze and Roxy that the Robo versions could impersonate to give him the morph-x. I mean, the entire tension of this episode would have been taken away if that happened, but that would have been the perfect opportunity to have Robo Blaze and Robo Roxy, or just simply one of them, disguise themselves as the good version and be like, oh hey, we're gonna help, you know, guard, or hey, how's this going? Are you guys doing okay? And then slip in the morph-x. That would have been so clever and genius, and a way to incorporate actual Blaze and Roxy, which has been one of my main problems of this season, is them not taking advantage of them having those characters, and that would have been perfect. And yeah, they have the streaks in their hair, but they easily could have dyed it or worn a hat. Like Blaze could have easily worn a hat. And so that did bother me in the sense that I felt logically that would have made the most sense for the villains to have that plan, and it would have been a great way to take advantage of you having two versions of these characters running around. And then I couldn't help but think how much cooler it would have been for this season overall if maybe Mayor Daniels hired Blaze and Roxy as his like personal guards or something, so that they actually had something more to do than nothing, and then it would have been cool to have them all colluding together, and it would have made more sense. And so I'm just kind of bothered by the fact that those two characters haven't been around so much. And in this episode especially, because in addition to that stuff I talked about with them disguising as their good counterparts, I think that it would have been nice to have real Roxy in this episode, as it had to deal with the rule about Rangers dating each other. And when Nate and Zoe got caught, they brought up via Ravi, that he's like, yeah, that rule sucks. And it would have been nice to have Roxy there, to have perspective on it. It just would have been a cool way to tie it together, and again, make use of having that other character. And that's kind of more of a nitpick about the season overall than it is about this episode, because I still thought this episode was strong. Like, my only main problem with the premise is that I felt it could have been fixed by the villains having a brain and just taking advantage of the fact that they have good doppelgangers out there. But it did give a lot of tension. I almost wanted him to get away with it. Like, I was almost also annoyed at the Rangers kept messing up him trying to get his medicine. And so I was enjoying that tension, and I liked the way they played into the Nate and Zoe stuff, where they became distracted by each other, basically, and got caught, and that caused problems. But then later, she saw that it can be, you know, a benefit because they fought hard for each other, and she abolished the rule, so it was a nice moment with that. And also with that, I thought it was a really cool scene when, after Nate, like, saved Zoe, and then she saved him, unmorphed, and used the cool noob spinner, well, I guess it is right, it's like a fidget spinner sword, but she used it in civilian mode and had a really cool, like, mini civilian fight with it. I thought that was a really cool moment and kind of added to, like, the epicness of that. And then at the end of the episode, though, he never got his medicine stuff, so he ends up turning, and it was a scene very reminiscent. I don't think it was necessarily purposeful, but it was very reminiscent of when the Dino Rangers found out about Mesogog, where he was kind of running off and trying to be on his own, and then he just transformed. And so that was not only a cool moment, but the perfect way to end off on a mid-season finale. I've said numerous times through this last almost decade now of this two-season split, is a really good way to do like the mid-season finale before the hiatus, is you gotta have something that people are gonna be remembering and talking about. Now the other part that needs to come in is they need advertising, but this is a good way to get people to be like, oh man, I can't wait to tune in when I get back, rather than just kind of ending on an episode, so it wound up being good for that. But overall, I really did like this episode. I thought it was a strong episode that blended some of the plots from this season and last season, and like I said, it blended them together. It carved them together in this plot that worked together with Nate and Zoe's plot actually working together with it. It wasn't just like two separate plots. That it would have been cool to follow up on both of them, but the fact that they interweave together so well. And most of my nitpicks really did just come from kind of my overall problems with some of the narrative this season, and not necessarily this specific episode. So since this season has been so mixed for me, very super super season-y. I'm going to be generous and give this one a 9 because I did think it was very solid as an episode, and I appreciated that it also ended on a nice cliffhanger to take us into the hiatus. But what did you guys think? Did you enjoy the episode? Do you think it's a good mid-season finale to end off on? Do you wish regular Blaze and Roxy were more used like myself? Hashtag justice for regular Blaze and Roxy. Let me know in the comments as always. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell so you get notifications from my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing out.